You know what's interesting about Gen X parents? Nobody really talks about them. Millennials get the spotlight, boomers get nostalgia, and Gen Z gets endless memes. But Gen X, born roughly between 1965 and 1980, they're the ones quietly shaping households while barely being noticed. And here's the thing, understanding their psychology as parents is fascinating, because their approach to raising kids is completely different from what you might expect. And it all comes from the world they grew up in. Think about it. Gen X grew up in a time of transition. No internet, no smartphones, not even cell phones for much of their youth. They were the first generation to be mostly on their own after school, the so-called latchkey kids. They learned independence early, figuring things out for themselves because there wasn't always someone around to check in. Now, fast forward, many of these same people are parents. And that independence shapes the way they raise their kids. Unlike the previous generation, Gen X parents tend to focus less on rigid schedules and more on self-reliance. They don't micromanage every moment of their child's life, not because they're careless, but because they genuinely believe in letting kids discover boundaries on their own. Psychologists call this a low-interference parenting style. It sounds cold on paper, but in reality, it fosters problem-solving skills and resilience. Gen X learned early that life doesn't wait for anyone. Their parenting reflects that lesson. But here's what's really interesting. Gen X parents balance independence with quiet vigilance. They're not hovering, but they're paying attention in subtle ways. Maybe they're noticing the small changes in mood, the minor struggles at school, or how their kid reacts to challenges. They don't broadcast every parenting win on social media, and they don't measure success by likes or shares. Privacy is a value ingrained in them. They learned that keeping your life offstage keeps you safe, and they carry that forward in how they protect their kids. Here's an example. Let's say a 12-year-old forgets to do their homework. A Gen X parent might ask a few pointed questions, make sure the consequences are clear, and then step back. They're not going to call every teacher or post a vent about it online. This comes from growing up in an environment where actions had immediate consequences and lessons were learned firsthand. They trust that structure without constant intervention, and in many cases, it works. Now, let's talk about emotional intelligence. There's a stereotype that Gen Xers are detached, cynical, or too cool to care. That's only half true. What's really happening is that they're highly adaptive. They learned early to manage stress, balance uncertainty, and solve problems independently. These traits translate into parenting as calm, measured responses rather than overreactions. When other parents might panic over a scraped knee or a failed test, Gen X parents tend to assess, guide, and let the child work through the experience. And yet, paradoxically, they're also deeply loyal and committed. You might not see them posting inspirational quotes about parenthood online, but they'll show up when it matters. If a kid is struggling, whether with friendships, school, or self-esteem, Gen X parents quietly step in with support. No fanfare, no expectation of recognition. They understand that competence matters more than approval, both in themselves and in their children. Another trait worth highlighting is Gen X's attitude toward technology. They grew up analog, so they often approach screens with a sense of caution. Many limit their kids' device usage not out of fear, but because they themselves remember a world where curiosity and play weren't mediated by apps. This is part of a larger psychological pattern: control over the environment. For Gen X parents, fostering creativity, independent play, and face-to-face interaction isn't nostalgia. It's a conscious choice rooted in their own formative experiences. Here's where it gets nuanced. Gen X parents are sometimes accused of being strict or too realistic. And yes, they do tend to prepare their children for life's uncertainties in ways that can feel blunt. But it's not about punishment. It's about teaching foresight. They've lived through economic instability, shifting job markets, and social change. They understand that life is unpredictable, so they emphasize adaptability, resilience, and critical thinking in ways younger parents might overlook. And let's be honest, this realism is paired with humor. If there's one coping skill Gen X mastered growing up, it's irony. Many of their parenting moments are infused with a dry observational wit. A failed science experiment, a messy bedroom, a minor sibling feud. These moments are met with calm, sometimes sarcastic humor, not hysteria. That humor isn't detachment, it's a tool to normalize mistakes and encourage learning without shame. Now, Gen X parents also grapple with self-reliance in themselves. They're accustomed to figuring things out alone, and that sometimes means they struggle to ask for help or admit uncertainty. Parenting is unpredictable, and even the most experienced parent doesn't have all the answers. For Gen X, this can translate into quiet anxiety or overthinking, but it also fuels determination. They research, problem solve, and strategize, all behind the scenes, ensuring their children have what they need without turning the process into a spectacle. Their approach to discipline is also worth noting. Forget authoritarian rigidity or helicopter parenting. Gen X parents often lean toward what psychologists call firm but fair guidance. They give clear boundaries, expect accountability, and allow children to experience natural consequences. But they pair that with support and understanding, reflecting their own childhood lessons about learning through experience. This balance is subtle and often misunderstood by outsiders, but it's highly effective. And here's a psychological twist you might not expect. Gen X parents tend to cultivate independence while simultaneously encouraging emotional closeness. They form deep bonds with their children not through constant attention or social media validation, but through shared experiences, one-on-one conversations, and consistent presence over time. This combination of autonomy and attachment fosters both confidence and security in their kids. Let's talk stress management. Life as a Gen X parent often feels like walking a tightrope. Work responsibilities, financial pressures, raising children, caring for aging parents. Yet many manage this with a remarkable capacity for compartmentalization. They've practiced it since childhood, balancing multiple responsibilities, handling crises alone, adapting to change. As a result, their children witness resilience in action, often without realizing the psychological lessons embedded in everyday life. And finally, here's what makes Gen X parenting so quietly revolutionary. It's low profile, but high impact. No viral posts, no staged Instagram moments, no performance metrics. Their parenting is measured, deliberate, and rooted in lived experience. It's about preparing kids for the real world while giving them the tools to thrive independently. They're raising a generation capable of thinking critically, handling uncertainty, and valuing competence over appearances. So, if you're a Gen X parent watching this, know this. Your approach matters. Your quiet consistency, your dry humor, your subtle guidance. It's shaping children who are resilient, self-aware, and capable of navigating life with a balance of independence and empathy. And if you're not Gen X, understanding their style gives insight into why they parent the way they do, forged by experience, shaped by independence, and driven by a desire to equip their children for life, not applause. At the Psychology Vault, we dive into these patterns so you can see the psychology behind the everyday choices. Gen X parents aren't invisible. They're the steady hand, the calm presence, the bridge between worlds that other generations sometimes overlook. And maybe that's their greatest strength, doing the work, raising thoughtful, capable kids, all while expecting no one to notice. If this resonated, hit subscribe to The Psychology Vault. And if you want to explore more about the hidden patterns of human behavior that shape how we parent, work, and live, check out the next video. You'll see just how much psychology is quietly running your life.